Gnome encounters. In the world of the paranormal, it doesn't get much weirder than reports of what seem to be actual, real gnomes lurking about, complete with tiny statures, pointy hats, the works, like something straight out of a fairy tale. It seems rather ridiculous that anyone could ever see anything like this, considering they are mostly considered to be the product of mythology, yet there are actually numerous and persistent reports of people from all walks of life seeing such creatures, and I have covered this here before, indeed on several occasions. Here is a selection of even more tales from the outlandish realm of real gnome encounters. A hotspot of supposed gnome activity seems to be in Central and South American countries, where they are typically known as the duendes. One such encounter reported on Phantoms and Monsters comes to us from the Merlo Principality of the city of Buenos Aires, in Argentina, where in the summer of 2008 there was a work crew trimming the many trees that lined the Avenida del Inca. In particular, they were tasked with cutting back an enormous, 100-year-old eucalyptus tree that had spread its massive branches out so far that it had become a danger to the motorists speeding by as well as the utility poles gathered around it. The tree was substantially chopped back, with some parts of it reduced to merely stumps. In the days after the extensive trimming was completed, there were numerous witnesses who came forward to say that they had seen little men with brownish clothes emerging from the stumps in a single file formation and, in most cases, heading in the direction of the nearby Leopoldo Lugones Library in Piedra Blanca for reasons unknown. Indeed, according to locals, the trees along that particular stretch of road, which travels along the path of a stream, have long been the source of sightings of elvish or gnomish beings lurking about in the branches. Perhaps these creatures called that vast tree home and were now upset that it had been so badly damaged. Another South American report was compiled by the researcher Albert Rosales and allegedly occurred in Casablanca, Valparaiso, Chile, in November of 1996. In the account, a group of local students came across a procession of tiny men, only around 1 foot in height, walking through a clearing. The otherworldly, diminutive beings were described as wearing brightly colored clothing of different colors, and they supposedly hid behind bushes and trees once they were aware that they were being observed. Although they seemed mostly shy and elusive, one of the entities, who happened to be dressed all in black, purportedly was a bit bolder and more aggressive than the rest, and ran towards the students, shrieking, throwing rocks, and generally trying to chase them off. Oddly, while this black-clad gnome seemed hellbent on threatening the witnesses, others dressed in green, red, and white seemed to conversely wave the kids closer and even call out to them. South America certainly is not the only place from which such bizarre experiences are reported, and there are reports like this from all over the world. On paranormal, there is a report from the area of Houston, Texas, from a witness who says one evening in March of 2003, his dog had gone to chase something out in their expansive yard, which he at first assumed was some wild animal or stray cat. When the man went to go see what was riling the dog up so much, he claims that he saw a humanoid creature standing a mere 1 foot tall, with a pointed hat, a white beard, and dressed in a clown suit without the big shoes and nose. The terrified man panicked, retreated into his house along with his dog, and then looked back outside through the window to see the bizarre creature eating from a bird feeder in the yard. It then scurried to the porch, smiled directly at the witness, and then disappeared behind it, never to be seen again. Also from Texas is a report originally given to World UFO Photos from a gas worker on a gas line near the town of Kennedy, TX, who one evening saw something odd move about on the periphery of his vision. When he looked to see what it was, it appeared to be a small humanoid standing only a few feet in height and dressed in some sort of strange, impish clothes. In this case the witness was able to take a photo of the creature, and said of his encounter, "I was working the night shift on an X-ray crew at a material gas plant. This was around 3 a.m. and there was only 4 of us in the plant at the time. I took this picture after seeing something swaying side to side out of the corner of my eye. I was in the basket of a man lift coming down when I took the picture. By the time I unhooked my harness to get out of the basket, the creature was gone. The police were called and walked premises. The officer told me there were 26 UFO sighting calls throughout that night. If you zoom in you can see the silhouettes of eyes and elongated mouth. I have no doubt of what I believed I seen that night. The other person that saw it with me took off running for the truck. What does this photo show? Is this a hoax or something more? In the state of Idaho, there is an account from a witness on ThoughtCo, who says his father had his experience in 1965, while he was out hunting elk with his father and brothers at the Salmon River. At the time, the group had split up to try and cut off a herd that they had accidentally spooked. At some point, he grew tired and took a break by sitting on a large boulder, and that was where things would quickly get rather weird indeed. The one who gave the account says of his father's encounter. It was a mildly warm day, and he stopped to rest in the shade of some large boulders to strip off some of his gear and have a drink of water. When he sat down to rest, he felt a rock zip right by his head. Thinking it was one of his brothers playing a trick on him, he yelled at them to stop. That's when he noticed tiny footprints in the soft dust under his feet. And again, another rock was thrown in his direction, closer this time. My dad had always been told about the little people who lived in the rocks and crevices of mountains and hills, an ancient band of Native Americans who barely escaped the white man. They made their home in the hills and, if bothered, would put a curse on you if you failed to heed their warnings. Feeling a chill creep up his spine, he slowly rose, gathered his things, and said, in very slow Shoshone, I am leaving. I'm sorry I disturbed you. As he was walking away downhill, he heard small feet slapping the rocks behind him, but being a tad afraid, he never looked back. He never told his father or brothers and could hardly tell me for fear of me thinking he was crazy. I believe him. What were these things? Were they forest spirits of some sort? Something else? There was another forest encounter of this type posted by a Reddit user named Alex N, who says she and her boyfriend had a strange sighting while out hiking in the Cherokee National Forest in the United States of Tennessee. During their hike, they rounded a bend, and she would say of what they saw. We both stopped in our tracks. There was a tree directly ahead of us, about 20 feet away. At the base of the tree, I briefly saw the silhouettes of three beings. They were around 3 feet tall and very slender, and all of them seemed to be holding a stick or staff in one hand. One was holding a staff and with the other hand was pointing at something on the ground next to the tree, and all of them were looking at it. It was as though when we rounded the bend, we caught a brief glimpse of them and then they vanished. I did not tell my BF what I had seen, but he went on to describe the exact same thing. So, of course, we ran over to the tree to see if we could discover what they were so fascinated by. I didn't expect to see anything but dirt and leaves, but there was actually a neat-looking rock sitting right where they had pointed. We love collecting rocks we find while hiking, but we left this one the hell alone. Unbelievably, the boyfriend of this witness would purportedly tell a friend from work about what happened, and the man had his own odd tale to tell. She says of this encounter. When this guy was a child, he and his best friend went exploring some local caves. He said it was a point of honor among the local kids to see how deep into the caves they could go, so he and his friend decided to go further than ever before. After plodding along carefully for around 40 minutes, they were startled to see a light up ahead. They crept along toward the light, and found that it was coming from this little room-like structure off to one side of the main cave system. When they peeked around the rock wall, they saw that light was being emitted from a lantern. And sitting around the lantern in a circle were several small men with beards and strange hats, and they were playing with these huge cards with weird symbols on them, unlike anything the kids had seen before. He said these men were incredibly short, and for some reason, he remembers that they had these massive buckles on their shoes. Just the classic, fairy tale image of a dwarf. As intriguing as the scene was, the kids freaked out and ran all the way out of the cave. The dwarves never even noticed them. Besides outdoors, there is a surprisingly large number of people who have encountered apparent gnomes right within the confines of their own homes, pushing it all further past the boundaries of the bizarre. One story comes from the Perm region of Russia in 1989, and was originally published in an issue of Zone. The witness claims that in July of that year, she had been asleep in her modest apartment when she was awoken by an indistinct feeling of dread creeping over her. When she opened her eyes, she could see a short figure crouched over her, with a pale gray complexion that looked ancient, and large, pitch-black eyes like a shark, as well as a sparse beard. Another, younger-looking one then appeared, and the two gnomes stared at her before vanishing to leave an orb of light in their place, which then drifted out of the room and out of sight. In the United States, we have a story from Your Ghost Stories that supposedly took place in the city of Fontana, California, where the poster lives with his family. One day, his brother allegedly had a very eerie experience in 1994 when he woke up in the wee morning hours for no apparent reason. He claimed that he sensed a heavy feeling of eyes upon him, but could not discern where this odd sensation was emanating from at first. That is, until he looked towards the doorway. The poster says of what happened to his brother next. He turned to look towards the doorway of the room. His eyes quickly focused on this creature that was no higher than the adjacent electrical outlet. He recalls that the creature was wearing a weird, dirty sport coat. He also recalls that it had on one of those old boat hats, similar to that of a leprechaun. The sinister, overly exaggerated smile it wore stood out the most. My brother's natural reaction was dictated by the intense surge of fear that ran through his body. He quickly sought security under his blankets and turned to face away from this thing. He did try to rationalize to see whether or not what he saw was actually, physically there. He said it took all his will and might to turn his attention back towards the doorway, and there it was again. Motionless, sat perfectly still, and with the same sinister smile. The night carried on, and the sun's rays did make it to his bedroom eventually. It was only then that he made an attempt to find this creature. It was nowhere to be found. My brother ended up tucked under his blanket, unbelievably frightened, until the next morning. Neither of us have any idea as to what it was that he saw. I've heard folklore about gnomes, and, the more I think about it, that's kind of what it sounds like.